Well, ladies and gentlemen, firstly, welcome. It's wonderful to be here. I would love to say that these are the new premises of UNSW, but they are at least until 7:30 this evening. Before I start, I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this building is situated, and I also pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, who may be with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a wonderful, in my opinion, evening that we're about to share. It is the first of a number of intimate evenings where opinions of socially engaged leaders and academic knowledge can be shared to explore big ideas. And I've got to say, to have Ela Gandhi as our first guest is a real coup, and I'm really, really pleased to be here to see her being interviewed, and I'm sure very well, by Laura Shepherd. I'd also like to say, many of you may not know, but not only is this a wonderful occasion, but as far as I know, it is the first official occasion where our new Vice-Chancellor and his wife are in attendance, and we welcome them, and you can go home knowing that you were at the first official engagement that Ian Jacobs attended as Vice-Chancellor, and we wish him well. I note also that Professor James Donald, our Dean of Arts and Social Sciences, is here. We welcome him. I don't know whether Catherine Griner's here. My sheet says she is, but she's on her way, or Catherine Griner's on her way. Neville Roach is definitely here, and we welcome him. The Advisory Council members are really, it's a pleasure to have you all here, and we also welcome donors, alumni, and overall all our friends. Today we have Ela Gandhi in conversation with Laura Shepherd. So let me first introduce Laura. Laura is an associate professor at our university. She holds a PhD in international relations, a master's in general and international relations, and a master's in social science research methods from the University of Bristol in the UK. Her primary research focuses on the United Nations Security Council's Women, Peace and Security agenda. And she's secured the highly competitive, and we know well this is highly competitive, Australia Research Council funding to study international policy frameworks that try to ensure the participation of women in peacekeeping, peacemaking, and peacebuilding. Laura's particularly interested in post-structural accounts of gender, international relations, and security, and much of her work investigates concepts and performances of authority, legitimacy, and power through these theoretical frameworks. She's very widely published, and I'm very pleased to say that she's also been very involved with DFAT, that's our Foreign Affairs Department, on Women, Peace and Security agenda throughout Australia's term at the UN Security Council. And I can't resist, the folk that gave me this cheat sheet said that you were involved in the term of office we had at UNSW's Security Council. And I thought the Vice-Chancellor's already getting very, very worried. So we have a very good interviewer, but we also have a wonderful interviewee. And I want to say, as someone born in South Africa, that's me, to somebody who's born in South Africa, namely Ela Gandhi, reading her story was just chilling and wonderful. Ela is the granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi, and she's been active in anti-apartheid struggles in South Africa for many, many years. She was under house arrest for 9 years during the struggle against apartheid. Ms. Gandhi is the guardian of the Phoenix Settlement. For those of you who know, that's the iconic centre established by Mahatma Gandhi. And she also founded the International Centre on Non-Violence, ICON, of which there is an Australian chapter. Ela was amongst the members of the United Democratic Front who met with Nelson Mandela prior to his release from Pollsmoor Prison on the 11th of February 1990. She remains a champion of women's rights and a strong advocate of the teaching of the principles of non-violence at every level of education, starting at the formative pre-primary age. when you look up about Ela, it's actually wonderful to see what she's achieved. So I welcome her to Australia. I hope she's not too worried in the hands of Dr. Shepherd, but I'm absolutely certain it'll be a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And thank you, everyone, for coming this evening. It's truly a pleasure to be here. And Ela, particularly, thank you for making the journey. And I'm really honoured to share the stage with you. So David gave us an introduction and explained that your formative years were spent in Durban in South Africa. I wondered if we could begin by sharing with us some of your experiences of that time, maybe starting with explaining how your family came to settle in South Africa.
I think a lot of people don't know that Gandhiji spent 21 years of his life, formative years of his life in South Africa. He was 24 years old when he came there, and he left in 1914. So he arrived in South Africa in 1893 and left in 1914. When we read history, we read about his works in India, but he did a lot in South Africa as well. And that part of his work was actually experimental, because that's where he learned, and that's where he changed, transformed. Mr. Mandela often says, somebody imputed this to me, but it isn't my statement. It's Mr. Mandela who said this, that India gave us Mohandas Gandhi, and we gave back Mahatma. When he left South Africa, he had left two very important organizations. One was the Congress, Natal Indian Congress, and the other was the Phoenix Settlement. Phoenix Settlement was a symbol of, of the way of life. How do you live a life of nonviolence, the culture of nonviolence? How do you build it? So that was the ideal at Phoenix Settlement, and the Natal Indian Congress was the political organization. So when he left South Africa, he sent back, after about 3 or 4 years, when there were requests for him to come back, he said, no, I'm going to send my son instead. And my father was asked to come back to South Africa and continue that work. And that's the legacy that my father continued with in South Africa, and we were all born in South Africa. That's how I got there.
Thank you. With the Phoenix settlement was, as you say, a true experiment in social justice and in educating for peace. At the time, the Phoenix settlement would have been quite a radical challenge to the state in South Africa, because it brought together Indians, whites, Africans living together in search of an equitable society and an ethical life. Did you experience those challenges as a child? Were you conscious of the challenge that the existence of the settlement posed to the South African state?
Yes, growing up at Phoenix Settlement, we realized that the Phoenix Settlement was an island in apartheid South Africa. The rest of South Africa was divided into different race groups, areas where people of one race would live. At Phoenix Settlement, it was referred to as the released area number 33. That is how that area was described. And it was a released area because it wasn't designated for any specific race group. And that's how people of different races lived together in that area, of all race groups. Living at the Phoenix Settlement itself, we had visitors coming and staying with us at Phoenix Settlement of various race groups and so on. And we were brought up to respect all people. We didn't, you know, I don't know exactly when I could say that so-and-so is an Indian and this is some other race group and so on. For us people, human beings were human beings, and we didn't recognize race. So that was the one thing. The second was about work. My grandfather and my father taught us that all work must be respected. So no matter what you did, there was no hierarchy of jobs. So you would respect every job and you have to learn to do it. You can't just say that you respect it, but somebody else must do it. You have to learn to do all jobs. So we grew up doing everything. And this area, Phoenix Settlement, had no facilities. It was a rural area, and there was no electricity, no running water there, no municipal services or anything. We had to do everything. And Gandhiji at that time began to experiment with conservation and how you could live a life, that would be ecologically healthy and ecologically good. So this is what we learned over there. And we then respected the world, the nature, the earth. We respected people, and we respected all religions because there was interfaith prayers daily being said at the settlement.
It's wonderful stories. It paints a really vivid picture for us, I think, the idea of living in harmony with nature and harmony with each other. And it's a very obvious way in which your grandfather and your father's philosophies and ideals shaped your early life. And do you think now, reflecting on it, that had a profound impact on how you view social justice and the challenges, struggles that you've been involved in?
Absolutely. I think what I learned in my early childhood has actually remained in me unconsciously. A lot of things that we learn in early childhood make an impact in your later life. And when I began to think about it, that's when I thought that early childhood is the area which requires attention. In most countries, and particularly in our country, we spend very little money on early childhood development and a lot of money at tertiary level of education. So, the balance is very, there's a huge gap. And yet it is so important to instill the correct values at that stage. So what I learned then was very important, and it has definitely shaped my life.
And has it informed your commitment to early years education and educating for peace?
Yeah, because you see, in early childhood, I also experienced India's independence in 1947. I was there as a 7-year-old, and I experienced that, and that experience drew a patriotic spirit in me. And that patriotism that the people in India felt, I transported it to South Africa, and I felt, that we must also have our flag flying in South Africa. We must also have the kind of liberation that India had. And so definitely it had an effect on my life.
And you've been involved in some amazing organisations throughout your political career. And I think in South Africa, one that stands out for me particularly was the Natal Organisation of Women, which of course you co-founded. I wonder if you could share with us how that came about, how you became involved with founding that organisation.
I think, firstly, women's work, I valued that from early childhood as well. Because I saw the work that my aunt used to do, and this is my mother's sister, and learned about, my mom used to tell me about my grandmother, who played a very huge role, but nobody talks about her, unfortunately. And so, that's exactly what happened in South Africa as well. We would find that when there's a protest or something, women will be in the forefront. In the boycotts that we had, women would be the ones who go out and, mobilize the community. But when it comes to leadership, who's going to head the organization, it would be all men. I mean, even in CODESA, if you look at the negotiations, you'll see all men there. Well, eventually, because we fought, there were a couple of women who came in. But you continually have to fight for your rights. And despite all that we did in South Africa, we still had to fight even at that stage. So yes, with that consciousness about women's role, we formed the Natal Organization of Women. And that happened just soon after I got unbanned,
Yeah, of course. And in the political climate of South Africa at that time, did you face much resistance in forming the organisation, or were other political parties quite accepting of the organisation of women?
Well, what happened is most of the political parties were banned at that time, and the leadership of the political organizations were either imprisoned, in exile, or under banning orders, or listed. If they are listed, they can't, enter politics and so on. So everybody was very happy that women organized. And I think I can safely say that women's organization was the first organization that organized people across the race. All race groups were part of the Women's South African Federation of Women, or Federation of South African Women, FEDSO, we used to call it. And women of all races were part of that. So in 1956, when you see that huge march, which is celebrated, 9th of August is celebrated in South Africa to this day, and that march had, the 4 different race groups leading the march, women of the 4 different race groups. So what I'm saying is that women started the whole idea of uniting South Africans across the race barrier. Natal Organization of Women was exactly like that. We had all the race groups in it. So I think everyone was very accepting, and we played a role in filling the gap that was created by the banning of the political organizations. But the government didn't take us very seriously, thank God for that. So we didn't get banned very quickly. And we were able to do our work quietly in the community and so on.
And what were some of those activities that the Natal Organisation of Women were involved in? Can you share with us some stories of your time with the organisation?
Okay. There were a number of activities. We organised groups in the communities, various local areas, to look at what are the issues that face the local communities, how we can mobilize people around the issues. So we had lots of little issues being taken up, like if an area had its rent being increased, and because people lived in government housing, it was a demonstration against the government. So it was, the rents were being paid to the government. So we had rent action committees which were started, and a lot of the women were part of that. And there were many other things like empowerment of women, making women self-sufficient, helping them to set up some form of sustenance so that they can become self-sufficient. Women began to sew, women began to start little child care centers in their homes, in their garages, and so on. And so there were many different ways in which different communities, depending on the needs in that particular community, began to organize. And every time you organize, you are learning a skill, because organizing is a huge skill itself. I mean, for the business people, I often ask, have you ever studied what a great manager Gandhiji was? Imagine him managing a march like the Salt March. So, those skills are really important, and they learn from organizing.
And I think the way that you've explained how the organisation tailored its activities depending on the needs of the community, that's really a hallmark of what I understand your passion for social justice to be, rooted in the community and very grounded in that civil society organisation. And I'll come back to that later, I promise. But I wanted, if you were willing, to ask you the extent to which you were able to remain in political life when you were spending that period in house arrest. Were you able to maintain those contacts and to fulfill what you felt to be your vision or your objectives?
Well, because I was a social worker, and they couldn't deprive me of doing the work I was doing.
Right.
Even though, I was under house arrest for a certain period of time. That's in the evening, and over weekends and over holidays and so on. So I was still able to work, and as part of my work, because social work is about casework, group work, and community work. So part of my community outreach program was organizing communities, and I did that. And, that way I was able to continue the work. But we also, part of that work was to get communities to understand why they were suffering whatever they were suffering. And that is very important, because people don't really make the connection. They don't make the connection with their suffering and apartheid policies. It's remote, so we had to, through education, begin to get communities to understand. And we used to have house meetings. People would call up neighbors who had the same problem, and they come to one house. And we would go there and we'd talk to them. I wasn't allowed to talk to a lot of people, but that was the underground work. Hopefully nobody would know, and nobody did catch me at that time, otherwise I would have been arrested. But we used to have little house meetings like that. You're not allowed to talk to more than 2 people. 3 people make a crowd. That is what house arrest orders are.
Wow. 2 people at a time.
Only
Yeah.
me and another person.
Wow.
If there is a third person, then that is a crowd.
That's in violation of the order. That's just fascinating.
Yeah.
And yet you were able to continue to exercise this passion and this commitment to social change in South Africa. It's really inspirational. You mentioned when we were talking about the Natal Organisation of Women that the launch was scheduled to coincide with the anniversary of the 9th of August 1956 and the march against past laws for women. So from the time that it was launched, the Natal Organisation of Women made that really strong historical connection to women's rights in South Africa and to other struggles that were going on for social justice. And now, you know, in 2015, barely, but we're in 2015, so we're 30 years on again from the launch of the Natal Organisation of Women. Do you think that the challenges that women face in South Africa now are very different to how the challenges they were facing 30 years ago?
Well, to some extent, they are different in the sense that now they have the Bill of Rights, which has clauses in it which protect women's rights. So, and we have certain laws that protect women as well. But we still have a lot of challenges because not everybody is able to access the law. Not everybody is able to, exercise their rights, because unless women are independent and have, are able to stand up on their own feet, they would be reluctant to go to a police or a lawyer or any authority for help. So in many instances, they do suffer a lot of the same kind of problems. But I would definitely say that today, a lot more women are reporting. And if we see a lot more domestic violence, it's not because domestic violence has increased, but because more women are reporting.
And do you see part of that as a cultural change in South Africa? I mean, you mentioned the Bill of Rights, which I think presents a really important legal framework to enable or facilitate that cultural change. Maybe you could share with us how the Bill of Rights came to pass and what its key principles are, because it's such a, I get very excited about legislation and policy, I'm sorry, but it is a very exciting bit of legislation.
Yeah. Firstly, as far as women are concerned, and there were many women who were party to this in South Africa, so I cannot take the credit for that. There were lots of women who went out into every neighborhood and collected the grievances of the women and asked them, what would you like to see in a Bill of Rights? And then we drew up a charter, Women's Declaration of Rights. And then that declaration was then given to the people who were writing up the Constitution. And we said that these are the demands of the women, and now we must see how we can put these demands into the Bill of Rights and into the different laws that we have in the country. So that is how we went. But the important thing is to go around house to house. Doing it in an office is easy. It's not so time consuming, but people are not involved in it, and therefore you really don't know whether it's going to be acceptable to everyone. Whereas if you go out to every home and talk about it, and you have to go 2 or 3 times because some people will say one thing and the others will, contradict that. And so we've got to look at, what women really want. I don't know if you want me to give the example of polygamy and...
If you're comfortable, I think people would be fascinated to hear it. Yeah, absolutely.
Because one of the issues that we faced was many of the women said that we must now, not have any more polygamy recognized in South Africa. And then there were others who said that no, according to their tradition and their religion, you can have more than one wife. So how do you overcome this situation? And we had a complete division in the views that women themselves were, presenting to us. So then we said, okay, what are the grievances? If you have, at the moment what's happening is not now, but at that time, that if there are 4 wives, assuming there are 4 wives, then the one wife, according to the laws, the one wife who was married according to the legal rights would inherit everything. The other 3 wives would get nothing. They have no rights. So how can we ensure that everybody has rights? And so we put that into the Bill of Rights, that all women, have to be treated equally without either supporting polygamy or not supporting it. We said this is women's rights and every woman should have these rights. And so those rights were put in. For that, we had support from all the women. And that is how we overcame that hurdle. So in the same way, there are issues that, you come across when you work in the community.
And again, I think that grounding in the community, like I said earlier, has really been the hallmark of the work that you've done. And I think it's inspirational to hear you talk about going, house to house and being part of that kind of dialogical formation of policy and legislation that really recognises the importance of a participatory approach. And I think your work historically, my understanding of it at least, which is partial, has been in and with those civil society organisations, and that's where you've made a real difference. And one of the, as I said earlier, the quotes that's been attributed to you is the idea that government will become irrelevant if it doesn't work with civil society. And I think that's such a powerful, strong statement of how the politics and the social aspects of any community fit together. Some of the work that I've been doing recently, working with the United Nations Peacebuilding Commission, looking at how civil society organisations, particularly women's organisations, can be more involved in peacebuilding, suggests that these government organisations are beginning to recognise the importance of civil society contributions and beginning to recognise that civil society organisations need to be included in peace education, peacemaking, peace building. Can you tell us a story about where you may have seen the civil society organisations in South Africa speaking directly to the government and having an impact, I suppose, on political processes in your experience?
I think, because the African National Congress was a liberation movement, and it comprised of civil society organizations. So at the present moment, what happens is that there are a lot of civil society, there are a lot of policies where civil society organizations are involved. For instance, you have a community police forum.
Right.
So civil society organizations are involved with the police in order to, assist the police, but also to monitor how the police are working.
Right.
So that's one of the things. And then we have similar forums. We have education forum. We have a governing body where also parents play a big role, which didn't happen in the past, especially with the black schools. But now all parents are involved in the education. At various other levels. But there's still a great deal of need to actually train people. And this I saw recently at a meeting in Kerala, in India, where they have an institute for local government, for local leadership. And in that institute, they train people, they tell them how things work. Because if you don't know who supplies your water, who is responsible for that water, who supplies your electricity, which particular person is responsible for that, you don't know who to go to, and you don't know when to complain and when not to complain, when to do something else that, sometimes a protest is necessary, sometimes it's not. And so it's only with that kind of education and understanding that people can really make a meaningful contribution.
And that level of empowerment through education is so significant, isn't it? And you will have seen that over and over again, I imagine. I'm conscious of the time, but there's a couple of further questions that I would like to ask. One is about the telephone hotline that you set up, which I know is still close to your heart, and it's something that I'm fascinated in personally. During Ela's tenure in politics in South Africa, she set up a 24-hour domestic violence helpline, and it was phenomenally successful. And one of the key differentials of this helpline was that it involved men from the beginning, and at that time that was really quite radical. We hear a lot now in the news media about getting men involved in women's rights organisations, and this was some time ago, and it was, as far as I can gather, something for you that was a matter of course, that you would involve the men of the community in violence prevention programs. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit about the helpline and how you came to set it up and the successes that you saw.
Okay. The helpline started in my constituency, and so the first thing I did after was in Parliament, and I was allocated a constituency, was to call up a meeting and have discussions with the people as to what are the problems in the area and what can we do to, bring about some relief. So one of the problems that was raised was about abuse, women abuse, and then there were a number of people who came out and volunteered to help with to do something about it. People then spoke about setting up an organization and all kinds of different things. And we said, let's look at what we have in the community. And we went out and we investigated, and we found that there was a child welfare society, there were a number of different organizations, even at the police services, they had some organization there that were giving assistance to women, although there were problems in every one of them, but there were organizations. We then found that one of the biggest issues was that a woman would feel too embarrassed to go to somebody face to face and complain about the problem. And from the volunteers, we had men and women. So the men said, we also want to help with this. So we trained all of them. There were a couple of men and a couple of women. We had 5, dedicated people and 2 others who would take on. So we got them to go to, some lessons as to how you counsel, what are, the telephone, what do you say, how do you say it. We made a list of all the resources. So you can, if there are certain things, you first hear what they have, the problems they have. Then you decide, as to what are the different avenues that the person can take, and who are the different people responsible, what are their telephone numbers, and so on. So you have a whole list of them. And then we set up this line, and then we started finding that there were times when men would phone, and they would say, I beat up my wife, but I'm feeling terrible about it. And we said, now we've got to find a group that is going to help to counsel this person. And we did that. And today, there are lots of men who come and they get counseling. There are some very good stories of people who have been rehabilitated. And the helpline, now we have a one-stop center. The helpline hasn't functioned recently, but the government has set up a one-stop center in the same constituency. And at the one-stop center, you have everything. All the services are provided there. So no matter what, you can telephone, you can go there personally, you'll meet your doctor there, you will get legal advice there, you will get everything in that one-stop center.
And that grew out of the helpline?
Yeah, after the helpline, the government decided that they're going to set up these kinds of centers, because one of the issues that we raised was that the police services, there was secondary abuse. Because you go from a person is abused, then they go to the police, and they are made to sit there, and then they are questioned, and here this person is traumatized, but So there's secondary abuse at the various levels. And so we felt that it was important for trained people who understand what a person goes through. And, they handle the whole problem. Yeah.
Those kinds of violence prevention programs that involve all members of the community and really focus on rehabilitation and finding different solutions to conflict, those have only really taken hold in the last 5 years. You were truly a visionary when you set up the helpline. I suppose I would like to finish by asking you to reflect on violence prevention and women's rights, and to acknowledge that 2015 is a particularly significant year in terms of the global peace movement and the global women's rights movement. We've got 15 years of the UN's Women, Peace and Security Agenda, and also the anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action, and it's an auspicious time. And I wonder if you could give us some thoughts about, what you think the priorities ought to be going forward in terms of violence prevention and the pursuit for gender justice and stable societies.
I think education of the community is the first priority, and education from early childhood. We find that often we ourselves as mothers differentiate between the boy child and the girl child, and that grows throughout life. But if we change our attitude right from that early childhood level, a difference can be made in society. So I think that should be the first priority. I just want to say that none of these things, even though you honor me by saying I did this, I was a visionary, but everything was done by a team of people, and we all volunteered. Every one of us used to volunteer our time. On the weekends, that telephone would be transferred to one of us, and we would take the calls on the weekend. But it's a whole team. And the team came together and discussed these issues and decided on what next to do.
As anyone who's ever worked in a large team will know, that in itself is inspirational. So I'd like to welcome David back to the stage. Thank you. And thank you, Ela. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, what a wonderful evening. And Ela, thank you so much. It falls upon me to make 2 votes of thanks and a suggestion. That could be a movie in that, actually. The first vote of thanks, Ela, is to you. I noted down a few things that I took from what you say. As an old lawyer, etc., I can go right through a day taking nothing from nobody. And here I sat and got from this. Firstly, your contribution, whatever your modesty may be, has been enormous. And your quiet, wonderful rendition of it is just virtuous from my point of view. The second thing is you display this wonderful problem-solving ability. Laura called it grounded work. And I noticed even in relation to the questions, you were trying to solve the issue. I wish there were more like you. Third, when you deal with problems, the problems you're dealing with, I was born in South Africa, and I always thought the problem was apartheid. You opened my eyes to the fact that was just one problem. There were problems of all sorts of other things, of violence, of unfairness to gender, and so on. You also extolled the virtues of civil society organisations, of education, which there'll be no disagreement from the Vice-Chancellor about, and also how important early childhood intervention is. And then you described to us the Phoenix settlement, and I kept thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if the whole world was the Phoenix settlement, where all of us with various racial groups got together and just dropped the whole thing and decided interfaith services were the way to go, and that there should be no hierarchy of jobs. Thank you so much for coming all this way in the beautiful sunshine that we're offering you, to delighting us tonight, and we absolutely wish you well with, I'm sure, lots more work that you've got ahead of you. The second vote of thanks is to Laura. Laura, I can't say you did a masterful job. I don't think Mistress Phil sounds right. You did a wonderful job of getting from a wonderful guest all her thoughts. I must say it fills me with pride, and I sincerely hope that the Vice-Chancellor on his first day feels that way, that we have people like Laura and all that she's achieving at our university. The only criticism I have is please don't apologise that you get excited with policy and legislation. Keep at it, and thank you for your contribution tonight and to the university generally. And finally, to the suggestion. Our Dean of Arts and Social Sciences, who's here, has tried and is doing a wonderful job of making his faculty raise more pertinent issues, issues that we can talk about, issues that we can go home, be it in the car, the bus, whatever, and talk about. And my suggestion is we should do just that, because Ela has started us thinking. Laura's work is there for us to look at, and we should continue doing it. I don't know, it was suggested to me in my notes that if one really wants to take it further, you can tweet and do whatever you like with the hashtag that Laura has. I can't do that, Laura, but I will definitely follow what you're doing. My suggestion is, let's talk about these issues. Let's get involved with the faculty to examine them and take them further. And let's basically tweet or do whatever we do to follow some of the thoughts that Ela has put to us. And finally, if I can just say, the biggest conundrum our university faces is if we produce Ela Gandhi on the first night of the Vice-Chancellor's role, what in heaven's name are we going to do on the second night? Thank you.